Elvis Presley walked into Murphy's antique shop in downtown Memphis on a quiet Saturday morning in October 1968, wearing clothes that wouldn't make anyone look twice. What he discovered in a dusty cardboard box tucked away in the back corner would break his heart and change how he thought about fame forever. The shop owner had no idea who was browsing through his store, and the box of letters, over 200 pieces of correspondence addressed to Elvis Presley, Graceland, was priced at just $15 as vintage correspondence lot. By the time Elvis left that shop 3 hours later, both he and the elderly shop owner would be crying, and Elvis would understand for the first time the true weight of the trust that millions of people had placed in him. But let me take you back to how those letters ended up in that antique shop, because the story of what Elvis found in that box will remind you that sometimes our biggest impact on others happens in ways we never even know about. It was a crisp October morning, and Elvis had been feeling restless at Graceland. He'd just finished filming Charo and was between projects, with too much time to think and not enough to do. He decided to drive through downtown Memphis, something he rarely did anymore without security or fanfare. He was dressed in his most anonymous outfit, faded jeans, a plain brown leather jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. No jewelry, no flashy clothes, nothing that would attract attention. He just wanted to feel normal for a few hours, to walk around his hometown like a regular person. Murphy's antique shop caught his eye because of the old guitar in the window. Something about it reminded him of the first guitar his mama had bought him when he was 11 years old. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door. The shop was cramped and dimly lit, filled with the kind of random treasures that accumulate over decades. Old furniture, vintage clothing, boxes of photographs, and shelves lined with items that each had their own story. Behind the counter sat Harold Murphy, a thin man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent his life listening to people's stories about their old possessions. "Morning," Harold said with a nod, barely looking up from the jewelry he was cleaning. "Feel free to browse. Holler if you need anything." Elvis wandered through the narrow aisles, running his fingers along the surfaces of old dressers and flipping through boxes of vintage postcards. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by pieces of other people's lives, anonymous among the forgotten treasures of strangers. That's when he saw it, tucked away on a bottom shelf in the back corner of the shop, a weathered cardboard box with letters, $15, written on masking tape across the top. Something made him curious enough to pull the box out and peer inside. The first envelope he saw made his heart stop. Elvis Presley, Graceland Mansion, Memphis, Tennessee, written in careful blue ink in what looked like a child's handwriting. Elvis's hands were shaking as he pulled out envelope after envelope, all addressed to him. Some were postmarked from the 1950s, others from the early 1960s. There were letters from children, from mothers, from soldiers, from people who poured their hearts out to a man they'd never met, but felt they knew. He looked around the shop, then carefully carried the box to a corner where he could sit in an old chair and examine the contents more closely. The first letter he opened was dated December 1956. "Dear Elvis, my name is Sarah and I'm 8 years old. I heard you sing on the radio and it made me happy when I was sad. My daddy is sick and mommy cries a lot, but when your music plays, I forget about being scared. Can you please keep singing for little girls like me? Love, Sarah Williams, age 8, Birmingham, Alabama." Elvis stared at the childish handwriting, the carefully formed letters, the obvious care that had gone into this message. He opened another. "Dear Mr. Presley, I am writing to thank you for your music. I am a soldier stationed in Germany, and every night the boys and I listen to your records. They remind us of home. Your voice makes us feel less lonely and gives us hope that we'll see our families again soon. God bless you. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, U.S. Army." And another. "Elvis, you don't know me, but I am 16 years old and I have polio. I can't walk very good and kids at school make fun of me. But when I listen to Hound Dog, I feel strong and brave. When you shake your hips and don't care what anybody thinks, it makes me think maybe I can be brave too. Thank you for showing me it's okay to be different. Your friend, Margaret Cook. Elvis opened letter after letter, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Stories of loneliness, of hope, of pain and joy and dreams. People sharing their most private thoughts with him, trusting him with their secrets, believing somehow that he would understand. After reading for nearly an hour, Elvis looked up to find Harold Murphy watching him curiously. "Find something interesting in that old box?" Harold asked, walking over. These are letters to me," Elvis said quietly. Harold squinted at him through his glasses. "Come again?" Elvis pulled off his cap, running his hand through his famous black hair. "I'm Elvis Presley, and these are all letters that were sent to me, but somehow I never got them." Harold's eyes widened behind his glasses. He looked at Elvis more carefully, then at the letters scattered around the chair. "Sweet Lord," Harold whispered, "you really are him." "Where did these come from?" Elvis asked. Harold sat down heavily in another old chair. "Lord have mercy. I bought them from an estate sale about 6 months ago. Lady named Mrs. Henderson passed away, and her family was cleaning out her house. Said she worked for the post office for 30 years. "The post office?" That's what they said. Apparently back in the 50s and early 60s, when you were getting so much mail that it was overwhelming the Memphis postal system, they hired temporary workers to help sort through it all. Mrs. Henderson was one of them. Harold paused, looking uncomfortable. According to her family, she took some home. Said she was going to make sure they got to you eventually, but I guess he trailed off. "She never sent them," Elvis finished. "Her family found boxes and boxes of letters in her attic, all addressed to you. They didn't know what to do with them, figured they were just old paper by now. I bought several boxes, thought maybe collectors would want them for the novelty." Elvis felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. All these years, people had been writing to him, sharing their pain and their joy, asking for nothing but to be heard, and he'd never even known they existed. He picked up another letter, this one from 1957. "Dear Elvis, my husband died in Korea, and I have been so sad I could barely get out of bed. But yesterday I heard 'Love Me Tender' on the radio, and for the first time since he passed, I smiled. Thank you for reminding me that love doesn't die just because someone goes away. Forever grateful, Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan." If you're feeling the weight of these undelivered messages the way Elvis was feeling it, please hit that subscribe button. This discovery would change how Elvis understood his responsibility to his fans, and there are more incredible stories about the hidden impact of music coming. Elvis was crying now, not caring that Harold was watching. Each letter represented a person who had reached out to him in their moment of need, believing he cared enough to listen, and he'd never even known they existed. "How many boxes did you buy?" Elvis asked. "4. This is just one of them." "Where are the others?" "Sold 2 to dealers in Nashville and Atlanta. Still got one in the back room." Elvis wiped his eyes and looked at Harold. "I want to buy them all back." "Son, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. These people trusted me with their stories. They deserved better than ending up in antique shops." Harold brought out the remaining box, and Elvis spent the next 2 hours reading. Stories of abuse victims who found strength in his music, lonely elderly people who said his voice was the only companion they had, teenagers who felt like outsiders until they heard him be different and proud of it. But what broke Elvis's heart most were the letters from parents. "Dear Elvis, my daughter has cancer and she's only 12. She plays your records over and over in the hospital. The doctors say she might not make it, but when she listens to you sing, she looks happy. Could you maybe send her a picture? She says you're the only person who understands what it's like to feel different. Her name is Linda Sue Patterson, and she's at St. Jude Children's Hospital." Elvis looked at the postmark. March 1962. Linda Sue Patterson would be a grown woman now, if she'd made it. "Harold," Elvis said quietly, "I need to ask you for something, and it might sound crazy." "What's that?" "I want to find these people, the ones who are still alive. I want to write back." Harold stared at him. That's a big undertaking. Some of these letters are more than 10 years old." I don't care. They took the time to write to me. The least I can do is try to respond." Elvis pulled out his checkbook and wrote Harold a check for $500. "For the letters, and for your help finding the dealers who bought the other boxes." "Mr. Presley, that's way too much." "It's not enough," Elvis said firmly. "These letters are priceless. They're pieces of people's hearts." Over the following months, Elvis embarked on what he privately called Operation Lost Letters. He hired a small team to track down every letter from all 4 boxes, to research the writers, and to find out which ones might still be alive. Of the 847 letters they recovered, they managed to track down 312 of the writers or their families. Elvis personally responded to every single one. To Margaret Cook, the girl with polio who had found strength in his music, he wrote, "Dear Margaret, I'm sorry it took me so long to write back, but your letter just reached me. You taught me something important, that being different isn't something to hide from, it's something to celebrate. I hope life has been kind to you, and I hope you're still dancing in your own way." To the widow, Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan, whose husband had died in Korea, he sent flowers and a letter. "Dear Mrs. Morgan, your husband was a hero, and so are you for finding the strength to keep going. Music heals because love heals, and love never really dies." Some of the responses came back marked, "Return to sender, addressee deceased," but Elvis kept trying anyway, writing to children and grandchildren, explaining about the lost letters and sharing what their loved ones had written. The discovery of the lost letters fundamentally changed how Elvis approached his relationship with his fans. He established a system to ensure that fan mail was actually processed and that people who wrote to him got some kind of response, even if it was just a form letter. But more than that, it changed how he performed. Knowing that somewhere in every audience were people who had written to him, shared their pain with him, trusted him with their secrets, made every show feel more like a sacred responsibility than entertainment. Linda Sue Patterson, the girl with cancer from St. Jude, was found. She had survived, become a nurse, and was working at the same hospital where she'd once been a patient. When Elvis's letter reached her in 1969, she called Graceland, crying. "I never thought anyone heard me," she told Elvis during a phone call he personally made to her. "I thought I was just a sick kid shouting into the void." "Everybody gets heard," Elvis told her. "Sometimes it just takes a while for the echo to come back." Harold Murphy became a close friend of Elvis's and helped him establish a foundation to ensure that fan mail from seriously ill children always received personal responses. The antique shop began specializing in music memorabilia, and Harold would tell this story to anyone who would listen. When Elvis died in 1977, Harold was at the funeral. He brought with him the very first letter Elvis had read in his shop, Sarah Williams's note about her sick father, and he placed it on Elvis's grave. "Some messages," Harold said, "are too important to get lost in the mail. Have you ever written a letter or message to someone famous, hoping they might hear you? Or have you ever discovered something that made you realize the impact someone had on lives they never even knew about? Tell us in the comments about those moments when you realized how deeply we can affect each other without knowing it. If this story reminded you that every person who reaches out deserves to be heard, make sure you're subscribed for more incredible stories about the hidden connections between people. Hit that notification bell for stories about how small gestures can change lives in ways we never imagine. The most important thing Elvis learned that day wasn't about fame or fan mail. It was about responsibility. Every letter in that box represented someone who had trusted him with their truth, and he realized that being famous wasn't about being loved by millions of people. It was about being worthy of the trust that millions of people placed in you. From that day forward, Elvis never looked at his audience the same way. Every face in the crowd might be someone who had written to him, someone who needed his music to heal something broken inside them, someone who was counting on him to be the person they believed him to be. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We never know whose lives we're touching, whose letters we're failing to answer, whose trust we're holding without even realizing it. The most important messages we send and receive aren't always the ones that reach their destination right away. Sometimes they take years to find us, but when they do, they remind us of who we were meant to be all along.